to the Historical Society Annual Dinner. Thank you all for coming. We're going to depart from the agenda, and I'm going to give a very brief report on the Society, and then I'm going to turn this over to Hank Cox, who's going to do the introductions and be our master of ceremonies. I'm happy to report that the Society is on very sound financial and corporate footing, thanks to the hard work of lots of people, including Miles McGrain, our past president, Kelly O'Keefe, our future president, and Mark Miller, our executive director. But especially, I want to thank Ruth McDonald, who is the Society's long-term. Ruth, will you stand up? Okay. I can see, or wave a hand or something so people, thank you. Ruth, after years of service to this Society, said she was going to retire, but she wasn't able to do that. We keep calling back on her for service. So you've already given her a round of applause, but please give her another, and thank you so much for all you've done for us, Ruth. I suggest that all you have to do is look around you and realize what a resounding success this evening has turned out to be. We have been turning away people all day who wanted tickets for this event. Thanks very much to Jeff Kottkamp, our dinner chair, to Mark Miller, our executive director, and Kelly again for looking after the myriad of details. Thanks to the Board of Trustees and all of our sponsors. Thank you so much for your contributions to this evening. This evening is what allows the Society to provide financial support to a number of projects that support the court and the Florida judiciary. And just last year, the Society sponsored the passing of the gavel reception and several other projects, including a educational video on the merit retention process, which we will be using at the court, and hopefully as a teaching tool, publication of additional volumes in the history of the Florida Supreme Court, and a very special project behind me that Kelly O'Keefe will be telling you about for a few minutes. I want to announce, but I'm going to let Tom do it, a very, very special project of the Society this year that he is in large part responsible for being able to stand here and announce it. So Tom, will you?
Thank you. It's my honor and real pleasure to announce a major acquisition by the Supreme Court Historical Society going forward. I'm going to tell you about the acquisition, and then at the very end I'm going to announce who gave it. We have been able to secure as a donation of a permanent loan to the Historical Society an item that will, two items actually, that will be then on permanent display in the Florida Supreme Court. As a former clerk of the court, I am especially honored to make this presentation because this is a desk and chair that were used by 2 different justices and 3 different clerks. It was originally used by J.B. Whitfield, who, when he was clerk from 1889 to 1897, just Clerk Whitfield later became Justice Whitfield. It was also used by George Whitfield, J.B.'s younger brother, when he was clerk from 1915 to 1940. The desk actually was used in the 1845 Capitol. It was used in the remodeled 1902 Capitol, and it was also used in the original Supreme Court building between 1913 and 1940. But in the meantime, I'd like to announce that the very generous donor of this very unique historical item is Sandy Dellenberg, our honoree tonight, and his family. And they're sitting right over here.
thank you very much, Tom, for announcing that, and thank you, Sandy, and all of your family. It's just a fabulous contribution to the library, and we're thrilled to have it. I'm going to turn the program over to our former president, Hank Cox, who's going to be our master of ceremonies tonight. He told me today when we were talking about all the problems of we're having to turn people away who want tickets and we don't have enough tickets. He said, Sylvia, he said, if you want, I can take care of that tonight so we don't have that problem next year. But I told him we didn't need that kind of help. Come on up, Hank, wherever you are. There you are. For those of you who were not able to attend last year, Hank and Justice Rosemary Barquette did a fabulous conversation, and it was just the hit of the evening when Justice Barquette sang a cappella to the crowd. If you weren't here last year, it's on the Society's website, and I urge you to watch it. It's a piece of Florida Supreme Court history you won't get anywhere else. Thank you very much, Hank. Take it over.
Thank you, Sylvia. I do or would prefer to be the way it was last year on the couch with Judge Barquette. For those of you who weren't here, it's an interesting couch. It had two ends. One was the left end and the other was the far left end. It has been a tradition with the Historical Society to introduce all the important people. Most of the material that was published included at the tail end that Hank Cox guaranteed we get out of here by 9 o'clock. So in order to do that, those of you who think you're really important line up on the left, and those of you who aren't sure line up on the right, and we'll get through it. But I do want to recognize the 6 sitting Supreme Court justices, but we're going to hold off on those for now and welcome former justices. And we have in the audience former Justice Major Harding, if you clap that much for each one, we're never going to get out of it, okay? Former Justice Joe Hatchett. Former Justice Stephen Grimes. Former Justice Parker Lee McDonald. Former Justice Harry Lee Anstead. And former Justice George LaBarga. See, you're laughing, but see, now you can cross him off your program and we can catch up here. And how much time did we save, Justice Barga? Also like to welcome judges of the 1st District Court of Appeal, Judge Clay Roberts. It's District Court, a little shorter on the applause. Judge Simone Marstiller. Judge Nikki Clark, former Judge Chuck Kahn, now a United States Magistrate, former Judge Peter Webster, former Judge Jim Jonas, former Judge Bill Van Norwick, former Attorney General Bob Butterworth, former Lieutenant Governor Jeff Kottkamp, one of my all-time favorites, Senior United States District Judge Patricia Seitz, Circuit Judge Terry Lewis. It's nice to get away from the formers, you don't feel so old. John Tomasino, Clerk of the Florida Supreme Court. Judge Tamisha Keel, Judge June McKinney, Judge Darrell Trawick, Judge Kathy Garner, and former Chief Judge of the 5th District Court of Appeal and now President of the Florida Bar Foundation, Emerson Thompson. We're getting there. I'd like to welcome President of the Florida Bar, Greg Coleman. President-elect Ray Aberdeen. President-elect designate nominee, likely successor, Bill Schifino. My favorite category, past presidents of the Florida Bar. And everybody who wants to be president of the Florida Bar. Also, I want to recognize those of you who are here who are recipients of the Pro Bono Awards today, but I know John Kozak is here, recipient of the Tobias Simon Award. Where's John? I could speak for an hour about how great John Kozak is and what he's accomplished. In any event, I was joking, John. And I finally want to mention my longtime friend, Florida State University President John Thrasher. Two things I want to say about President Thrasher. One, I applaud his remarkable talent in persuading Florida Department of Law Enforcement Commissioner Jerry Bailey in agreeing to draw attention away from Florida State University. Until after the NFL draft. And this is true. Not long ago, President Thrasher and I teamed up to roast the outgoing president of the Republican Party in Jacksonville, and needless to say, I was the only Democrat in the room. And I explained that by saying that when I was a child, my mother had repeatedly told me that if the urge to become a Republican lasted more than 4 hours to see a physician. And John Thrasher immediately said that that explained why I was in intensive care so much as a child. In any event, it is my privilege to introduce the hardworking, effective, and incredible asset to the Historical Society, Kelly O'Keefe. Kelly, where are you?
Thank you very much.
You're on. Go.
Thank you. I will try and be fast, but we've got a lot to cover. So we're going to get serious for a little bit, then he'll come up and be funny again in just a bit. So imagine you're sitting in the Florida Supreme Court or walking through its auspicious halls, and you don't see the faces of the Supreme Court justices who served for all those years before. We would really be missing out on the history of the court and the many traditions of the court. The Supreme Court justice portraits are a tradition that the Supreme Court Historical Society has taken on and has really taken on, let me tell you. This has been a labor of love, and I'm very happy to be here talking about the work that you're about to see today. We are honored to be continuing the tradition tonight with unveiling the portraits of the newest Supreme Court justices. Now, when I say the newest, we've had the Supreme Court justices here. We've known them for a number of years, but I don't know if you are aware, but only 3 of the Supreme Court justices' portraits are currently in the Florida Supreme Court Lawyers Lounge. All 7 of them need to be there, and tonight we are very honored to have the opportunity to present them to you. Now, the work on the project started over a year ago, and it started with President Miles McGrain asking the question, how can we help to preserve the history of the current court? So Lisa Goodner, the state court administrator at the time, shared an idea with us. She said, you know, funding's not available to cover the cost of completing the portraits of these last sitting justices that had been appointed. So Miles and the society had it to answer. We knew what we needed to do. We knew we needed to fund these portraits. And thanks to Miles, thanks to Lisa, thanks to the work of the Supreme Court Historical Society, and thanks to the many sponsors and supporters of the society, we are able to do this tonight. We do want to thank also the artists that are here today that helped us to prepare and complete these portraits. So I'd like to take a moment to introduce them. They're also mentioned in your program. Jeff Bass is from Pensacola. He often does historical works for private collections and museums. and he completed the portraits of Chief Justice Labarga and Justices Kennedy, Polston, and Perry. And Jeff, you are here somewhere, and I wanted you to stand. Where are you? Bright lights, bright lights. He's here. There he is. Thank you. Also here with us tonight is Darlene Williams, and she has a gallery just down the road in Havana, the D. Arthur McBride Portrait Studio. She completed the portrait of Justice Polston. She also previously painted the portraits of Justice Wells and Grimes. And Darlene, I know she's sitting over here. I wanted to introduce her so you all could say hello. So there's 4 portraits that are being unveiled tonight, and that's Chief Justice Labarga, Justice Kennedy, Justice Polston, and Justice Perry. In addition to unveiling these portraits tonight, I do want you to know that the Historical Society is doing an event on April 9th at this court where we'll be presenting the portraits to the court and to the public. The ceremony will celebrate the entire collection of the portraits, which are a very integral piece of the Florida Supreme Court's history. So before, and I'm hoping my technology works, I'm giving you the heads up. Before we unveil the newest portraits, we wanted you to see the portraits that are currently in the Lawyers Lounge in the Florida Supreme Court Historical Society. So with help from our executive director, Mark Miller over here, I am hoping that you will see the portraits, yes, there we go, of Justice Periente, Justice Quince, and Justice Lewis. So here's what we have. And now let's see the rest of the collection. What I'd like to do at this time is invite up family members and friends of the justices who had been asked to do the honors of unveiling the new portraits. And while they're making their way up, I'm going to give you just a few tidbits of information about the portrait collection. The portraits really started with the 1905 court. The court asked that the photographer Alvin S. Harper prepare photographic composites of the sitting justices up to that point. There are still 10 of those hanging in the old courthouse in the old Capitol. In the 1940s is when the paintings started. The court then said, we need these, we need to keep this tradition going. And we had, at that time, about 49 oral portraits started. They started painting those. The complete collection was not finished until the 1980s. The 1980s is when we got to the point where we had everybody except one that needed to be painted. We had no photos of this justice, Justice McCrae. And we commissioned, or the court commissioned someone to paint this based on the descendants' photos, a collection of the descendants' photos. But come to find out, she painted her uncle. So we have this imposter justice that's sitting there, Justice McCrae, but, you know, it's a good story. It's a very good story. I get to tell it tonight, and every time our docents walk around the court and show the portraits, they get to tell the story as well. I'd like to start with Chief Justice Labarga's family and friends. These are his daughters and his wife. And I've got Stephanie and Caroline and Zuma that are going to unveil. So go ahead and do the honors for us. And next, we have Justice Kennedy, Jennifer, his wife, if you would do the honors. Thank you. And next, we have Justice Polston, and he has asked the artist to do the unveiling. So Darlene, if you would. last but certainly not least, because I think that Justice Perry has more people at this dinner than anybody else. So, if you all would do the honors. All right, and if Jamon would join me at the podium, and the rest of you, thank you all so much for coming up. We appreciate it. I just wanted to say, we have a special treat tonight. We're very honored that we have an opportunity to hear from Justice Perry's son, who has requested that he read a poem that he wrote in his father's honor. His father has not heard the poem, and he tried to get it from me today. I'm just telling you, okay? But please, Jamon, if you would.
Well, first of all, I have to say I was brought up here under false pretenses. When I was originally asked to do this from my father, he said, you have to unveiling my portrait. Will you write a poem for me? I said, sure. So I thought it'd be an intimate setting, just, family, friends, but here we are. So this is a poem that I wrote for my father. So it's called A Journey Within. A long road. I'm sorry. Just bring the microphone. Okay. A long road and a tough journey, or perhaps a long journey and a tough road. No matter how you look at it, a foundation was built from the beginning, as a path was derived from a dirt road. They say a person's will can move a mountain, but the boulders of fear and ignorance seem eager to block the chosen path. Every now and then, the laws of nature gets a reality check. I'm sure St. Augustine would be proud. Resting on your laurels while counting numbers and the stars was never an option. The tragic fall of a chosen one made the transition to counsel an easy decision. Yet those boulders were attempting to raise the bar. But little did they know, the first law of nature filed a grievance to rectify the sins of the past. Will the problems ever be solved? Probably not. But unless the road is traveled, the journey can never be forced. As times and moons pass, prudence and your presence take hold. The seeds in your company are formed as you start developing a league of your own. Mr. Robinson would have been proud. The public began to take notice as those boulders started to break apart. However, thorns remained. After climbing the tree of life only to reach a branch or two, who knew that a red bush would help pave the way to justice? Countless roads have been followed, yet only a few were able to obtain a similar path. I can only hope that your successors learn from your trials and courageously fend off the tribulations.
He's a little bit taller than I am. Thank you, Jamon. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing your talent and your words of respect and admiration for your father. I can tell this is a very close-knit family. If you look in the portrait of Justice Perry, he's got his family sitting next to him.
This has nothing to do with anything here tonight, but earlier this week, Miles McGrain called me, said he'd been in Herman Russomanno's office in Miami, and I needed to know that Herman Russomanno had in the lobby business cards that said Herman Russomanno, past president of Florida Bar, which has been about 15 years. And I told Miles, I said I wouldn't get upset about that. John DeVault and I at the Bedell firm have the same thing. We require that all our lawyers carry cards that say Herman Russomanno, former president of Florida Bar. Our Chief Justice has redeemed himself since I was up here earlier in my commitment to get out of here by 9 o'clock, and I told him, you keep it short or I'm going to get Dean Cannon back up here to say what he said 4 years ago. Whoa, yeah. Mr. Independence of the Judiciary. Okay, enough's enough. It is a personal privilege to welcome to the podium the head of Florida's justice system, lawyer, circuit judge, District Court of Appeal judge for 17 hours, Justice of the Florida Supreme Court, and now the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and someone in whom all Floridians can have the confidence that we are a great judicial system. Chief Justice George Walbolt.
Let me just begin by saying that I'm not too worried about Dean Cannon because that cannon misfired about 3 years ago. My wife and I had the privilege of actually attending a conference at the Greenbrier Hotel in the mountains of West Virginia this summer. And it was a conference for all 50 Chief Justices of the state, and I got a chance to meet a number of them. But at a dinner like this, we had the honor, actually, of sitting with Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, and she was sitting next to me. And I noticed that her dinner, her meal was delivered to her long before anybody else's. And she started eating. And she looked at me with a stern face because she was going to be the keynote speaker, and looked at me with as stern as she can, you know how she is. And she grabbed my arm and said, "Son, if you're going to go around making speeches at dinners and lunches, you make sure they let you eat. So when you agree to speak, you make sure that the dinner and the meal comes to you first, and then you speak. Otherwise, you won't talk. You won't get to eat at all." So first thing tonight I did is, knowing that I was going to get my 3 minutes from Hank, that I better eat. The state of the judiciary. It is as usual. You know, we have judges working very, very hard. We're hoping that judges will be properly compensated. Florida, as you know, has now surpassed New York. It is California, Texas, and Florida as the largest, most productive states in the country. Yet, as far as judicial salaries, we are now number 26 in the country. We're right down there with Alabama, and not too far behind Mississippi. I heard Mississippi has a billboard that says, "Thank God for Florida." So we're hoping, since we have now entered into this age of prosperity, that hopefully we will prevail and let us catch up a little bit. The one thing I do want to talk about, I think, Hank, how much longer do I have?
You're about there.
You see behind me? I want to talk about the commission we just created on access to civil justice. Greg Coleman, the president of Florida Bar, who is here somewhere. Greg, where are you? Stand. There he is. Greg and I were talking about creating that commission long ago. He knew he'd be president at the same time that I'd be chief. And it became our goal to create this commission because we feel it is something that is desperately needed. Not just for the poor obviously need it, and the poor has been neglected, but also for America's middle class. I'm talking about the people who earn too much to qualify for legal aid and yet do not make enough to be able to hire a competent lawyer. We call it the gap. And that's what we're talking about. We created a commission, 27 members. We have members from the legislature. We have the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee as a member, the chair of the House Judiciary Committee. We have a representative with the governor's office. The attorney general is a member. The chief financial officer is a member. And we have members of the business community, public supermarket. The general counsel is a member. The general counsel for all of Disney, not just Disney World, all of Disney is a member. And the CEO and owner of Cheney Brothers close friends of Greg and myself, is a member. So we have the business community, we have the legislature, we have the legal profession, we have the legal aid society, we have everybody in there. And I'll tell you the same thing I've been telling everyone who asks. What are we going to do? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to lock them all in a room, very smart people, and they're not going to come out until we get a solution. And we're going to have an interim report in October of this year, and we're going to have a final report early in 2016. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to working hard on that. Not going to let it go. I'm going to keep pushing. Greg's going to keep pushing. And the next president of the Florida Bar, Ray Aberdeen, who's also here. Where are you, Ray? There he is. Now, if you think you're in trouble with Hank up here running things, just wait until these two Cubans get a hold of the state. We're going to have Bay of Pigs Part 2, but this time we're going to get our own air support. Thank you. And that's the state of the judiciary.
As Sylvia comes up here, I want to tell you from experience and having been president 2 years ago, that Sylvia is the greatest thing that's ever happened to this society. Sylvia?
I was talking to Chief Justice Labarga in as diplomatic a way as I knew, which isn't that diplomatic, about the need that we needed to move this along, and so he was only going to get 5 minutes on the program. And there was a long pause, and he said, Sylvia, he says, I can't say my name in 5 minutes. But he did, and thank you.
Hank told me 3 minutes.
Had you but known. Thank you. And thank you for setting up that commission. It's such an important thing for our profession. When I was a freshman in law school, Sandy Dallenberg was an upperclassman, and I was in absolute awe of him. 50 years later, and just a few more years than 50 years later, but 50 years later, I'm still in awe of Sandy Dallenberg and what he has accomplished in his life. Constitutional lawyer, legislator, educator, bar leader at every level, president of this society, member of the board. He was at our board of trustees meeting again today, just like he has been for decades. One of his most notable contributions has been his fearless advocacy of the independence of the judiciary, including his strong support of merit selection and merit retention in accordance with its intended purpose and process. His commitment to pro bono is legendary and a model for all lawyers, earning him the Florida Supreme Court's Tobias Simon Award a number of years ago. It would take me the rest of the evening, but since I only gave Chief Justice Labarga 3 minutes, I can't take more than 3 minutes either, to list all of his awards and the contributions to our profession, our state, our country, and to the Historical Society. And instead, let me simply present to Sandy the Society's Lifetime Achievement Award and let you recognize him and hear from him. And I'd like to read, if my eyes are going to do this. Lifetime Achievement Award presented to Talbot Sandy Dallenberg in recognition of a highly distinguished career as a lawyer, his contribution to the Florida judiciary, and contributions to this society as a trustee member for over 25 years, and as is president, and by unanimous vote of the Florida Supreme Court Historical Society Board of Trustees. He has served as a member of the Florida House of Representatives, President and President Emeritus of Florida State University, Dean of the Florida State University College of Law, Chair of the Florida Constitution. This cost us a lot of money to copy. Chair of the Florida Constitutional Revision Commission, Chair of the Florida Commission on Ethics, and in numerous and other important positions. His contribution to the lives and well-beings of Floridians will be his lasting legacy. His lifetime of contributions to the organized bar and our justice system have been extraordinary. President of the American Bar Association, President of the American Judicature Society, Chair of the American Bar Association Section of Legal Education and Admissions to the Bar, and Chair of many ABA committees are among them. He has worked tirelessly on issues including model dispute resolution proceedings, assistance to emerging democracies, detainee treatment, open government, pro bono service, and civil liberties. He is a mentor to many in these endeavors and a model to all. His continued devotion to the law, the Florida judiciary, the legal profession, and to public service, as well as his outstanding character and ethics, are deserving of this society's highest appreciation and highest honor.
Justice LaBarca, I think it took more than 3 minutes to read that damn pack.
We can start now.
Yeah, and also I'm just really quite honored that Hank gave me 15 minutes and only gave you 3. You know, this Lifetime Achievement Award? What the hell is that? Isn't that something you give to a geezer? Somebody's been around for a long time, hasn't done too damn much damage, and you know he's going to appreciate it a lot. That's the kind of person you give Lifetime Achievement Award. I'm one of them, and I love it. Thank you, Sylvia. But my understanding of the Lifetime Achievement Award changed a little bit 2 weeks ago. Did you learn that the Golden Globe Awards Committee had given the Lifetime Achievement Award to George Clooney? Okay now. Handsome? Witty? Sexy? I mean, good God. You know, clearly, I deserve this award. And then I learned, because the host, Tina Fey, one of the hosts of that Golden Globes Committee Award, observed that George Clooney actually was married to a beautiful woman who was far more intelligent and far more accomplished than he was. And by God, that fits all categories. So and I'd like to introduce my law partner, Patsy Palmer. Donna Lou Asker used to say, Sandy, you're a different person since Patsy married you and let you keep your name. My daughter, Gabrielle, is here. Gabrielle, you can stand, I think. Gabrielle's a lawyer in Miami. My son, Josh, is a teacher. This is a school night. He's not here. But I'm also very proud to have my brother, Dick, and his wife, Jean, join us. Dick. You know, I've been very lucky to be a lawyer during the time I've been a lawyer. It was a good time, in part because things were possible then that don't seem to be possible for many people today. I was able to serve in the legislature at a time when Democrats and Republicans really got along. That's where we got a lot of things done. I always thought that everybody was inspired by Governor Askew and by Governor Collins, and people really believed in public service. It was a wonderful time. My money did not control politics in those days, and it's really great to think about people I had a chance to serve with. In fact, as I prepared these remarks, I thought of all the people I've had a chance to serve with, and there are an enormous number of them here, beginning with service on Jimmy Jonas's football team in grade school. But I tried to put together a list of all the people that I wanted to recognize, many of them here, some of them not here, and the list got so damn long that I really quit trying to compile that list, in part because several people on my list came to me and said, keep it short tonight. so no less. As I think about my life at the law and the court, several things really seem to me to be significant. First, the court survived a terrible crisis in the mid-1970s. I think one of the most significant things I ever worked on was the impeachment process of justices, 3 justices during that time. And that's the time I got to know a really bright, courageous young lawyer named John Thrasher, and we've been friends ever since. And the work we did there, I think, made a great deal of difference in the way the court has progressed. Thank goodness Governor Askew was around. Thank goodness for merit retention. Think about how the court emerged from that process, from the disgrace that the court was in for a period of time, to suddenly becoming, again, a very distinguished court in the United States. Look, this is the court that is the first court in the country to adopt the interest on lawyers' trust accounts. Every court in the nation has done that now. This is the first court to adopt cameras in the courtroom. First court in the nation to do that. And it's a court that took the leadership in things like dispute resolution, drug courts, and many other things. And so as I think about what happened to the court over this period of time, I come away thinking, gosh, what a wonderful thing that culture that existed for a brief time in the Florida Supreme Court was changed. And it's changed so much for the better. And so that quick movement of the court really convinced me that institutions can change and be better. And so I feel very lucky to have served during this time. And it occurs to me that our speaker tonight reminds us that there's been an enormous change. When I went to law school, the events that are described in Devil in the Grove were going on. Willis McCall was still a character in Florida that many people knew and understood what was going on in the Groveland boys' case. And yet we've moved beyond that. Think about what's happened to the bar. Suddenly we have African Americans, suddenly we have Hispanics, hell, Hispanic Chief Justice. We have women. Patsy Palmer. We've had these wonderful changes, and yet as I find delight in all the progress that we made from those evil days of the Groveland case, and I think about everything that has been accomplished, I have to pause and wonder what future generations are going to say about us. What is it that people are going to say about our criminal justice system? What are they going to say about the way we run our prisons? What are they going to say about the way we provide access to justice? These are things that we ought to begin to think about and pay attention to. And with all the great examples we've had in the past, I think that there are real possibilities with judges and lawyers working together to bring about these changes. And of course, so many of the changes that are really important have been led by the court itself. And I'd like to say just a few words. You heard a poem earlier Justice Perry's son gave a really nice poem. I don't have a poem for you tonight, but I've got doggerel. You know what doggerel is? It's irregular meter and bad verse. So here's my doggerel, if I can find my glasses. Justices before whom I've practiced. To the court, we lift our merlot. Soon enough, if correct, but often quite slow. Thomas, Adams, and of course BK. To Drew and Thomas, to Drew and Thornell, we lift our Cabernet symbolically. O'Connell was the last that Collins appointed. Governor Bryant then Caldwell anointed. Richard the Great, Wade the Lad, Vassar, Jimmy, and Joe, then McCain the Bad. Hal the Unfortunate, then 4 horsemen of Reformation, then Arthur Allen and Joe took up their stations. We toast Reuben for his merit selection. He toasted with water, which we do with affection. Carl, Alderman, and Parker Lee, Ray, Leander, and Rosemary. Bright Grimes and Cogan and the bow-tied Harding, Wells, Anstead, sadly departing. Like others achieving constitutional senility, retiring despite their continued ability. Barbara Periente, Fred Lewis, and the twice appointed Quince, followed by, happily, continued excellence. Quintero, Bell, and Canaday, Polston, LaBarca, Perry, no further can we say. But what I can say, and I say with pride, that for 52 years, it's been a really great ride. Thank you so much.
Ten months ago, when we lost Reuben Askew, a number of people said, what are we going to do? And the answer was, we still have Sandy. I got a call Saturday night from Bob Josephsberg. I think people in the room who know Bob Josephsberg in Miami would say he is one of the best lawyers this state has ever produced. And Bob became teary-eyed when he said he could not be here tonight to honor Sandy Naumburg. It is now my privilege to introduce somebody who has been, I will say, Ackerman Centerfit made them very fortunate. State of Florida has been fortunate, remarkably fortunate, and any young lawyer who can get near him has been remarkably fortunate. He is and has been one of the best lawyers this state has ever produced. He served as a United States magistrate, Justice of the Florida Supreme Court, Judge of the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, Judge of the United States Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit, and Chief Judge of the United States Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit. His honors are too numerous to mention, but to put it simply as possible, for so many of us, he has been nothing less than a hero. Let me introduce Joe Hatchett.
Sandy, a few minutes ago, mentioned his law partner, Patsy Palmer. Patsy Palmer gave me the book Devil in the Grove right after its publication. She said, I bet you knew some of these characters. Well, I knew the characters, I knew the times depicted in the book, and I knew the events of those times. The book is Devil in the Grove, Thurgood Marshall, the Groveland Boys, and the Dawn of a New America, published in 2012. In 2013, the book was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for general nonfiction. The Pulitzer Prize Committee described the book as a well-detailed chronicle of racial injustice. Other awards included Best Book of 2012, according to the Christian Science Monitor and the Boston Globe. In 2013, the book received 5 to 6 other awards. Let's talk about the times first. America was recovering from the Great Depression. World War II was over. America had defeated Hitler, it had defeated Mussolini, it had defeated Tito. So America had reestablished freedom. But all Americans in America were not free. Black Americans in Florida lived and worked under Jim Crow laws, had been disfranchised since the beginning of the century, struggled every moment of every day for justice in a white supremacist state that recorded a higher number of lynchings than any other region in the South. Devil in the Grove is about fruit pickers and about fruit grove owners. It's about sheriffs. It's about the Groveland boys. It's about Justice Thurgood Marshall. It's about the Legal Defense Fund. And it's about young, courageous white and black lawyers who practiced in Florida. In short, the book is about events of my lifetime and about the lifetimes of all of you in this room who are over 50 years old. I stated that the book was about fruit pickers, like my father and the fathers of most of the kids in my neighborhood. The book is about the Ku Klux Klan, an organization that still to today claims that it must cleanse American society. I can remember from an early age white men in robes and hoods warning us African American kids that we should never again play softball in a certain city park in Clearwater, Florida. I remember other contacts with the KKK in St. Augustine and in Jacksonville. The book is about the Groveland boys, but really it's about any boys of color during that period of history. Boys who did not commit a crime, boys who were indicted by an unconstitutional grand jury, boys who were not given adequate time to prepare for trial, boys who were convicted by an unconstitutional jury. The book is also about Thurgood Marshall, General Counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and his law school, Howard University Law School, that produced 70% of the black lawyers in America at that time. It's about Thurgood Marshall, who went back at the law school, preparing for arguments before the United States Supreme Court, but find the time to encourage students to continue the quest to become engineers of change through association with the Legal Defense Fund. Yes, and it's about the Legal Defense Fund, the legal arm of the civil rights movement that after the Groveland case coordinated the legal fight against officially enforced public school desegregation that culminated in School versus the Board of Education. It's about Paul Perkins, an African-American lawyer who practiced law in Orlando. It's about Horace Hill, another African-American lawyer that I practiced with in Daytona Beach after I finished law school. And it's about the dawn of a new America. That's the part of the story that we are going to have to continue to write. Gilbert King has written about the Supreme Court history and the death penalty for the New York Times and the Washington Post. He's also a photographer, and his work has appeared in Glamour and New York Magazine, as well as the international editions of Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, and Cosmopolitan. Lionsgate has purchased the rights to Devil in the Grove, and a film is currently in production. Please join me in welcoming Gilbert King, the author of Devil in the Grove, and our keynote speaker.
Thank you very much. It's such an honor. Good pleasure. Thank you, Justice Hatchett. That was way too kind. It's very nice of you. I also just want to, thank Sylvia and Mark and Justice Chief Justice Labarga, for giving me a really great tour today of the Supreme Court. And it reminded me, just everybody's attitudes, why I really like working in these kind of books, because I feel like it's a tribute to the lawyers and the judges and the legal community that have supported me for many years. As someone who's not a lawyer, this stuff takes me a really long time to understand. And I'm always amazed by the generosity of attorneys who really seem to go out of their way to help me with things and to give me advice and look at some pages of manuscripts at time and say, oh, no, you have habeas corpus entirely wrong here. I mean, the lawyers, to me, I couldn't have done this book without the legal community from here to Florida up to New York. So I just want to thank everybody here just for that. I'm going to walk you through this story a little bit visually, so you don't have to look at me, which is always a good thing. You can look at these photographs, and I'm just going to sort of go through this story, this crime story that happens in Groveland, but I think by the end of it, you're going to look at the legal system a little bit differently. And if you were like me, I was absolutely shocked by some of the things I was seeing. These are the images that we see of the Jim Crow South, the separate water fountains, the separate entrances at movie theaters that African Americans had to use, the Jim Crow balconies up in the top, again, a separate theater for blacks to use. And when you look at these iconic images, I think they give you an inaccurate description of what was really happening in the Jim Crow South. These pictures, the separate water fountains, they make Jim Crow sound rude or intolerable. They don't really speak to the brutality and the legalized white supremacy that was occurring in the Jim Crow South. And so I want to just start this story off in 1946, as Justice Hatchett was talking about. Here's a photograph of Thurgood Marshall, 1946, in the summer, and he's accepting the Spingarn Award, which is the most valuable contribution by an African American. And he's there, he's sitting next to Joe Louis and the head of the Tuskegee Air Guard, General Benjamin Davis. And it's the summer of 1946, and you can see Marshall is looking a little thin. I don't know, many of you have probably seen photographs of Thurgood Marshall. He always looked a little bit portly. In this photograph, he's really quite thin, and there's a reason for it. He is suffering from 104 fever, which he's had for weeks. And the day after this photograph was taken, he checks into the Harlem hospital, where he stayed for months. And people thought he was going to die. Doctors didn't know what was wrong with him. They ran all sorts of tests, but they really believed he was dying. And they called it Virus X. And he was in the middle of a trial in Tennessee. And it was one of the first race trials following World War II. And it was a very, very dangerous case. And Marshall went down there and defended dozens of African Americans who defended their home from the Klan and police officers who were mixing. And so Marshall, against all odds, managed to get acquittals for every single one of those defendants, which was totally unexpected. And as they were leaving town to go back to Nashville, police pulled him over, grabbed him out of the car, and drove him down to Duck River in Tennessee. And the reporters and the attorneys who were with him in that car ride were convinced that this was the end. Thurgood Marshall was about to be lynched on the side of a riverbank. And if you just think about that, a future Supreme Court justice, after winning a case in court, so infuriated the locals in Tennessee that they were going to kill him. And so that's how the book sort of starts out, in this strange and unbelievable moment where a future Supreme Court justice is nearly killed by the side of the road by law enforcement. 1946 was also a dynamic time because you had nearly 1 million soldiers returning from the war, African American soldiers. They served their country, they fought in Germany and France, and many of them experienced greater freedoms in France and Germany than they did back here in the United States. And so they came home and they were expected to slip quietly back into that Jim Crow lifestyle, that second-class citizenship. And many of them didn't like it. They didn't appreciate it. They felt they were giving their lives to their country, and yet here they were not being able to meet the eyes of white people on a sidewalk, or just having to go back to that second-class citizenship. And in the summer of 1946, there was a wave of soldier lynchings. So young African Americans, as a form of silent protest, continued to wear their uniforms after the war. And down south, many of them were being lynched because that was seen as an uppity thing to do, reminding the rest of Jim Crow South that you might be special because you served your country. And really the message to them was, get back into place. And so this man, Isaac Woodard, became the face of that summer, the terrible summer of '46. He was a serviceman. He was on his way home to see his wife after the war, and he was dragged off a bus in the Carolinas by law enforcement and beaten so badly that he lost his vision. And so here you could see him being led up to a fundraiser. Joe Louis is escorting him. It was a very, very big case in '46. Orson Welles had a radio show, and he used to talk about it constantly. And Woody Guthrie even wrote a song, The Blinding of Isaac Woodard, to just sort of call attention to the brutality happening in the South. I enclosed this photo. This is part of what I write about early in the book. And it was a dream that Thurgood Marshall used to have, more of a nightmare, really. And at the NAACP offices in New York, constantly they were being inundated with these atrocities that were happening across the country. And many times they would receive these lynching photographs, and they're all pretty horrible, hundreds of them. But this was the one that bothered Thurgood Marshall the most. This was a man named Reuben Stacy, and he was lynched down in Florida. And Marshall said it wasn't, the bullet holes in Stacy's body or the noose around his neck that really bothered him. What really got to him was the faces of these angelic children who had been brought out in their Sunday best, where they'd stand and pose around the body and have their photographs taken. And I was at a talk in Orlando, and a woman came up to me and she said, I just wanted to tell you that Reuben Stacy, the man in your book, he's one of my relatives. And she was the first, I believe she was the first African-American female judge in Hillsborough County. And I said to her, I have a picture that I often show in my presentation. I'm happy to take that out if you find it offensive, but I do plan on talking about this. And she thought about it for a second and she goes, leave it in, I want people to know that. And I think it wasn't a way of reminding people about the atrocities. I think there was a positive message in what she was saying. She was saying, look at me, I'm a judge. This is what I've come from. And she was really, I think, speaking towards the changes that she saw in America, and she wanted that photograph left in. Here's a photograph of Marshall, and this is very indicative of what Marshall was doing in the late 40s and early 50s. He'd get on a train by himself and often go down to these very dangerous cases down south. And this photograph was taken in 1951, just as this Groveland case is starting, and also coincidentally, just as Briggs was starting, which was one of the cases that they rolled into Brown versus Board. So you can imagine people around Thurgood Marshall were begging him not to get involved in these dangerous criminal trials at a time where he was really indispensable to the civil rights movement. This is a photograph I like to show because it reminds people of the difference. This is a great image from the movie To Kill a Mockingbird. And here you have Atticus Finch in this dramatic moment where he's cross-examining Mayella Ewell about the rape. And it's a very dramatic thing, and you feel like you get to the truth of the matter in this scene in the book and in the movie. And it occurs to me as I was researching for Devil in the Grove, there was no chance in the world that a young African-American lawyer was going to go up onto that stand and start cross-examining a white woman and questioning whether or not she was telling the truth. Every lawyer in Florida advised Marshall and his lawyers not to do that. And so all of a sudden, you had a totally different strategy. You could not question the word of a white woman in a courtroom like this. It would infuriate the jurors, and they were certain to send them to the electric chair. So Marshall's strategy in this entire episode was just to basically say, listen, we're not questioning her word. She was raped. We're not questioning that. We're just questioning whether or not she's identified the right people. And so that was their defense, and it was kind of surprising to see that, but there was a reason for it, and that they felt that Florida was going to send these Groveland boys to the chair very quickly. So the Groveland story starts with the accusations of a young 17-year-old newlywed who's already separated from her husband. And they go out one night in the summer of 1949. Some kind of dispute happens on the side of the road, and hours later, she's reporting that she's been raped by 4 African Americans. The Ku Klux Klan rolls into town hours later and starts burning down homes in the African American section of Groveland. And here you can see a photograph from Life magazine. Life magazine sent a photographer down to cover this story because it was seen as this explosive race riot down in Florida. It really wasn't a race riot, it was just a Klan burning. And the story was actually killed by Life magazine because there were so many of these stories happening at the time that they just felt they were going to be beating America over the head with another atrocity story. So they actually killed the story, but the photographs did exist. And you can see the photographer in real time is going out and doing this investigation. You can see Sheriff Willis McCall there in his trademark Stetson, examining the ruins. Governor Fuller Warren, the violence got so bad, Governor Fuller Warren called in the National Guard to protect the houses that remained in Groveland. There was also something very similar and curious, but the wealthy citrus barons in Florida at the time, they didn't want another Rosewood. They didn't want a black exodus. They depended on black labor. So curiously, you had the wealthy white people protecting their labor force. Whether or not you agree they were enlightened racially or they were economically motivated, that's another story. But throughout, they were loaning their trucks, they were transporting African Americans out, and they were protecting them, but it was mostly due to the economic interests. This is an editorial cartoon that appeared just a couple days after Norma Paget's accusations. And I think what's really interesting about this, and this was part of the trial atmosphere that Thurgood Marshall and his lawyers were wading into. And you can see that little quote, "If outsiders seek to hamper justice," that was delivered from Sheriff Willis McCall to the Legal Defense Fund lawyers. In other words, stay out of here. We don't want any agitators coming down here. Let us just have our own justice. We'll take care of this case. We don't need a bunch of black people coming down here and stirring things up. And that was a message that Marshall heard constantly in the South. Here's a photograph of the 3 Groveland boys a couple weeks after they'd been beaten mercilessly and tortured and basically forced to confess. The 4th Groveland boy by this time saw what was happening. He fled into the swamps, and his body was just riddled with bullets. They weren't bringing him back alive. So now you're down to 3 Groveland boys. Another interesting photograph, this is one of my favorites of these Life magazine series. This is a photograph of, in the foreground, you can see the prosecutor, Jesse Hunter, and he's interrogating one of the witnesses. That young man to the left is Lawrence Berthoff. And his father owned a little cafe in Okahumpka, Florida. And that's the first place that Norma Paget showed up after that night in question. And Lawrence Berthoff is being grilled, and you can see it in the eyes of the sheriff and the deputy because he's not saying what they like. So in the transcripts of it, you can see Jesse Hunter, the prosecutor, saying, "Don't you remember? You heard a bunch of screaming outside from a woman, and she came in, and you talked to her, and her dress was torn," and he's saying these leading questions. And Lawrence Berthoff talked to his mother. His mother said, "Just tell him the truth. We'll take the chance on this, but you should just tell the truth." And so Lawrence Berthoff tells an entirely different story. He says that's not it at all. She never said anything about being abducted and raped. She was very pleasant. She sat down for 15 minutes, waited till I finished my coffee, and she said she was just missing her husband, and she wanted to try and find her husband. And you can see the power of McCall and his deputy back there just glaring, because they're used to intimidating witnesses. And if you look at the trial transcripts, you see many examples of perjury. of people just coming in and saying what they really want said. And Lawrence Berthoff was sort of one of those heroes who just refused to do it. And he plays a very big role in the second trial. The trial, as you can imagine, was fairly predictable. It was over pretty quickly. 12 jurors, took them about an hour, convicted, and sentenced two of them, Walter Irvin and Sam Shepard, to the electric chair. The third, Charles Greenlee, 16 years old, managed to escape with a light sentence. He got life in prison on a chain gang. And so Thurgood Marshall thought that was a victory. In one of his famous quotes, he said, "If they don't give you the death penalty, that means the jury thought he was innocent." And he pretty much accounted for, he was actually picked up for loitering and in jail about 25 miles away at the time. He was nowhere near the scene. But since Norma Paget said there were 4 men, they had to find another man. The great thing about this photograph is this was taken before Thurgood Marshall and his lawyers brought this case to the Supreme Court. So it's taken on the steps. And you can tell they're in a pretty good mood. And the mood is they just got slaughtered down in a jury case in Lake County. Florida Supreme Court ruled against them. But Marshall and his lawyers knew the 14th and 15th Amendment better than anybody. And they knew that you could not have coerced confessions. They knew that the way Lake County was selecting their juries, which was by hand, would turn into a mockery at the Supreme Court. And it was a funny thing because Marshall and all his lawyers are sitting around the table, and the Chief Justices begin to start questioning Florida, saying, "Well, let's see, you're picking your black jury members by hand?" And the Attorney General was forced to nod and say, yes, he came up to this case, he knew they were going to get slaughtered. Everybody knew where this case was going. And the Supreme Court justices started making a game of it. They said, well, don't you have like a big wheel that you can spin and the names can be picked randomly? Don't you have one of those? And Florida was, no, we don't have one of those. And then another justice chimed in, what about a big hat? Can't you put names in a hat and pull them out that way? And they said no. And Marshall was just there laughing at this point because he knew which way they were ruling. And exactly, they overturned the verdict. And they overturned the verdict on the jury roll selection. But Chief Justice Jackson actually went a step further in the opinion. He said, this case represents one of the best examples of one of the worst menaces to American justice. He said, on that ground, I would reverse. So there was one man in Lake County who wasn't too thrilled with the Supreme Court decision. He had some really harsh words for those communists up in Washington, D.C. who are interfering with justice. And so here you have Willis McCall, who sort of made this implicit bargain with the people of Lake County. And he said, listen, there's not going to be a lynching in my jail, not in my county. He goes, we're just going to try them, give them a fair trial, and then send them to the electric chair. And that was his statement. And he made that bargain, and he was able to hold off a lynching. But when the Supreme Court overturned that verdict, McCall was responsible. And so he had an idea. He said, fine, there's going to be a retrial. I'll drive up there myself and pick up the Groveland boys. And so he drives up to Rayford, picks up Walter Irvin, Sam Shepard, handcuffs him, throws him in the car. Charles Greenlee does not join the appeal. He's 16. He got mercy. And the reason was because Marshall told him, look, you were kind of a charming 16-year-old kid on that witness stand. I think the jury had mercy for you. But if you join the retrial, the way the law works is that the jury might convict you and this time send you to the electric chair. And they said, you might be a hardened prisoner by then who's not so charming anymore. And he said, make no mistake, Florida will kill you. And so he said, stay off to the sidelines. We'll work on the appeal with Irvin and Shepard. And if we can get that done, we can come back and get you later. He goes, but you're putting your life on your hands by joining this appeal. So he convinced the 16-year-old to stay off the appeal. So McCall drives up to Rayford, picks up the prisoners, and then he takes a turn down a side road. And the next thing you know, Walter Irvin and Sam Shepard are found laying in a ditch. The strange thing about this photograph is it's all a lie. You can see McCall's Stetson hat all crumpled sitting on the roof there. McCall is standing there, his clothes are torn, and you can see blood dripping from between his glasses. And makes a phone call, makes a radio call, brings witnesses back to the scene, and he just sort of stands around this car saying, I hated to do it. They tried to escape, and it was either them or me. They went for me, and I hated to have to do it, but I was going to get killed if I didn't. And then a strange thing happened. The flash fired, and one of the witnesses at the scene says, that one just moved. And Walter Irvin was laying there, handcuffed to his best friend, but he was still alive. He was pretending to be dead. So they take Sam Shepard, throw him in a hearse, put Walter Irvin in a hearse because Jim Crow, they weren't allowed to ride the ambulances. Willis McCall got the ambulance. And they take him back to Waterman Hospital. So this is Sam Shepard, a photograph that his family members sent me, and they said, oh, we would like it if you'd include one of Sam's portraits in there. Sam was killed instantly by Sheriff McCall's bullets. Walter Irvin begins to regain consciousness in the hospital, and he's starting to tell a very different story than the one Willis McCall told. He doesn't mention anything about an escape. Why would he escape, he says? I have Thurgood Marshall as my lawyer. I just won a Supreme Court victory. Why would I escape? So you can see him laying here, and he's got one bullet hole in his chest. You can see one in the side and one in his neck. All 5 bullets are accounted for, except for one, the 6th bullet, the one through the neck. And Walter Irvin starts telling this story. Thurgood Marshall's in that hospital room. The FBI is in that hospital room. Journalists, this court stenographer, is taking transcripts. And Irvin says it was cold-blooded murder. McCall pretended to have a flat. He got out, opened the door, and just opened fire. Shot Sammy 3 times, pulled him out, and then shot Walter Irvin twice. Irvin just laid there pretending to be dead. He was handcuffed to his best friend. He couldn't run anywhere. And then Irvin says, McCall gets on the radio and calls his deputy, James Yates, and he says, I got him good. I got him good. Get back here. And Yates comes back to the scene, and he pulls out a flashlight, and he starts shining it down at the bodies. And then he says, this one just moved. He ain't dead. Pulls a gun and fires straight down into Walter Irvin's neck. Still, Irvin survives. The only thing he can do is just play dead and lay there. Then he says, they start going around to the front of the car and they say, rip my clothes, we got to make it look good. And Irvin is just laying there, drifting in and out, trying to keep his eyes closed. And then witnesses begin to come back to the scene. And the FBI is in that hospital room and they're thinking, well, this is interesting because McCall's version is that he's moving backwards the whole time, emptying his gun. And 5 bullets are accounted for. If the 6th bullet, according to McCall's story, they're never going to find it because it went right through Irvin's neck, clean through. But they say if Irvin's telling the truth, there's a good chance we know where that bullet might be. They rush back to the scene. They actually find the blood spot where Irvin was laying, and they take out a little shovel and they start digging directly beneath that blood stain. And 10 inches below, they find a .38 caliber bullet right below the blood stain. So this is actually uncontroverted proof that Willis McCall has perjured himself. McCall is unwilling to give a statement to the FBI. His deputy Yates says no comment, won't give a statement to the FBI. Walter Irvin agrees to give a statement. Believe it or not, they go forward for a second trial. And I like to show this photograph because it's young Paul Perkins. And here's Perkins. He gets to work with his mentor, his idol, Thurgood Marshall. This was the first case he ever worked on where he wasn't paid in oranges or hams. He was actually getting $3.75 an hour. And Paul Perkins was under the impression that, and here's why Thurgood Marshall loved him, because Most of the other lawyers were absolutely terrified of going into Lake County. They'd been warned that they would get killed. And at one point, Franklin Williams, another LDF lawyer, is in Orlando, and he's scared of going back to Lake County to investigate. But Joe Lewis is actually in Orlando training for a fight, an exhibition. And Williams has this idea. He says, I know, if I could get Joe Lewis to come with me to Lake County, nobody's going to buy. He was the heavyweight champion of the world. And so he presents this to Joe Lewis, and Joe Lewis says, I ain't going to Lake County. So Perkins comes up with this idea that someone must have told him that the Klan will never bother you if you have a child with them. So he borrowed a nephew, a 7-year-old boy, and brought him in to Lake County and went door to door, always having this kid by his side. And I looked at some FBI documents later and saw that the Klan had no such ethics. That was not really on their books. And as I was speaking in Orlando, and there was an older gentleman sitting at a table, and Paul Perkins' son came over and said, I want you to meet this guy. He was my uncle, or my father's human shield. He was the guy in that car we used to go around Lake County with. So that's one of the great things about speaking in Florida. I'm always reminded, and it's all brought home. I always see connections to the case. This is a photograph of Harry T. Moore and his wife and children. Marshall relied on Harry T. Moore a great deal in this case. His job mostly at this time was just to keep the heat and the pressure and publicity on Willis McCall. And here he is as a younger man being photographed, and in the middle of this whole case, a bomb explodes underneath Harry T. Moore's house, killing both him and his wife, Harriet. There's a gentleman, Ben Green, I highly recommend, he's here tonight. He wrote a biography. This is a man that not enough people really know about. A lot of people think Medgar Evers was the first modern civil rights martyr, but it really was Harry T. Moore here in Florida, the NAACP. If you want to learn more about him, I would highly recommend you read the biography by Ben Green. Fascinating man, and people should know more about him. What a lot of people don't also realize is that a lot of the money that came in from speaking about Groveland. So after Harry T. Moore's death, there was a huge benefit, Madison Square Garden, pictures of the bodies on the front pages of newspapers. It really did a lot for the fundraising. And Groveland, on the back of Groveland, thousands and thousands of dollars were raised, more than they really even needed for Groveland. And so Marshall and his lawyers would go around speaking about this case, and the money just flowed in from around the country. And Brown versus Board was basically funded on the backs of this Groveland case. Strangely enough, Walter Irvin has to go to trial again. He's given a chance. The governor, at this point, Leroy Collins, sees this as a carnival. It's just out of control, all these killings. He wants this case to go away. Florida's doing great economically. He offers a deal to Marshall and says, if you can get Walter Irvin to plead guilty, we'll spare his life. And Marshall actually says, this is a great deal. And he goes to his client and tries to explain to him what's happening. And think about that. Marshall presents to Walter Irvin the chance to save his life. He says, all you got to do is plead guilty. Walter Irvin says, fine, I'll do it. What do I got to do? And Marshall explains, you just got to plead guilty. And Walter Irvin says, okay, just go tell the judge that I'm guilty. And Marshall says, no, actually, it's got to come from your lips. And Irvin thinks about it, and he says, no, I won't do it. I'm not going to lie. And he turns down this deal. And there's a little bit of fighting within NAACP. Some of them say, no, Thurgood, you got to fight for this case. But Marshall is just coming off the back of this horrible case in Virginia called the Martinsville 7. And it was a very similar case, a rape case. And these 7 men in Virginia were convicted and sentenced to the electric chair. And one by one, every 15 minutes, they marched those men in and killed them. They were young men. And Marshall was often left dealing with the mothers. And it just broke his heart. So anytime he had an opportunity to save a life, he was going to take it. And so he advised strongly Walter Irvin to take this. He said, make no mistake, Florida is going to kill you. And Irvin just refused. And it was a strange moment for Irvin, because there was times in the trial he could have lied about something to make a better case. He just would not lie. I showed this photograph, again, is Walter Irvin in the middle, but next to him is a man named Jack Greenberg. And the reason I have this photograph in there, Greenberg was a young attorney, he'd just come out of World War II, not too long ago. He stormed the beaches of Iwo Jima, and I remember asking him several years ago while I was researching this, talking about storming the beaches of Iwo Jima. I said, you must have been scared out of your mind as a young man. And he said, oh, I was definitely scared, but I was more scared down in Lake County when I was working on this case, and the Klan was circling my hotel. So, and Greenberg, this is not ancient history. Jack Greenberg is still alive. He's still on the staff at Columbia Law School. And so sometimes you listen to these trials and you see the way the law works in these cases, and it kind of boggles the mind. You think this is ancient, but here is living proof. And Norma Paget, who you saw earlier, she's still alive too. A lot of people ask, well, what would have happened to Willis McCall? Shoots 2 people on the side of the road, lots of more violence in his past. Well, he actually served 28 years as sheriff of Lake County, 7 straight elections. The only thing that really got in his way was he kicked to death a mentally retarded prisoner in a cell in 1972, and Governor Askew suspended him from office. But he still continued to run, and he lost by a very small margin. And his quote later was something to the effect of, he only lost by a couple hundred votes. He said, I would have won easily if it wasn't for that damn murder trial they had me doing. So he was pretty unapologetic about it. And one of his quotes that he later said, I never killed anyone who didn't deserve killing. And so this was sort of the end for Willis McCall in 1972. I think I'll just take a couple questions, because I don't want to ruin the ending. As some people said, don't spoil the book, or don't. There's a lot of twists involved towards the end, especially with Walter Irvin and some of the extrajudicial stuff that Thurgood Marshall was able to accomplish. But if anyone wants to take a few questions, I'm happy to do so. Anyone? Oh, yes. Hard to see. Yes.
Were you surprised when you were researching the book about Governor Collins' response to the whole situation?
Well, I was. I mean, he represented this new vision of Florida. He looked at the death penalty as the gutter of shame. But there was also some sort of ambiguous moments in there, because at the end he sort of criticized Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP for getting involved in this case. And Marshall's response was, if we didn't get involved, all 4 of those guys would be dead. And so it was sort of, Collins was an interesting guy as he tried to sort of skate the fine line politically. But ultimately he really did the right thing in this case. And again, I won't spoil the ending for you, but it is interesting to see what happened. A lot of it is based on change of heart. And I will say that there's some people involved that you would never expect who sort of recognized the impact of Thurgood Marshall on their own lives, and they started to have change of heart. And I think that's an important part of what happens in this story. Yeah, anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Can you talk about Mr. Ackerman?
Mr. Ackerman, yes. Well, Mr. Ackerman, the one thing that the lawyers realized they needed was a white attorney on this case. And so Alex Ackerman took this case because I think he figured he was already in trouble because he was representing some African Americans to integrate University of Florida's law school. And so he figured his reputation was already shot. And so he took this case, but he really did believe in it. And he worked valiantly on this case. He had ended up doing a lot of the cross-examination, a lot of the lawyering in the case. And Marshall and his lawyers tended to stay back in the background a little bit. Yeah.
Okay, we can take one more.
One more?
Will you tell the story about the, I heard you before.
Oh, sure.
Tell the story about the public information when you were trying to get the information and finally aged out?
Oh, this is a research question. This is pretty fun. So I was trying to get my hands on these FBI files for a long time, and when you go and you request a large amount of files, you file a Freedom of Information Act, and you wait. And I remember they told me, since you want so many records, you're number 60 on this list. And every month I would call back, and it would be like, you're number 59. Number 58. And I did this for about a year, and they got to know me. And after about a year, I called up, and they said, well, Mr. King, today's your lucky day. And I remember thinking, whoa, did I crack number 30? And they said, no, it's much better than that. 60 years to the date after these cases begin, they all become public domain. And he said, and that just happened 2 days ago. And I said, well, what does that mean? He says, none of this has to be vetted. We can just release the files to you. And so literally the next day I was down on a train to Washington, and I had all these FBI files to go through, stacks of them that really had been sealed. They hadn't been really seen before. Some of the redacted ones had been out there, but most of these were just all released. So it was a great Christmas present from years ago. Well, so that's it. I'll definitely be out there signing, so if anyone wants to ask me any more questions or any, I'll be happy to talk. I really do appreciate this, and thank you very much for this honor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for just a wonderful end to a wonderful evening. Thank you, Sandy, and your family for being here. Thank you all for being here. We are adjourned.